Welcome everyone to our ongoing series of classes as part of the study of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 universal divine commandments. So for the past number of classes, we have been studying inside the text of the amazing encyclopedia, the S'dei Chemed, and this is a Talmudic, a halakhic rather, Jewish law encyclopedia, extremely detailed and thorough, as an encyclopedia should be. And there's a section here where he's dealing with the application of certain rules that are in Jewish law for the Jews. Do they or don't they? And if they do, how and when do they apply to the Ben Noach, to the non-Jew? This is in the regular standard printed version of Lubavitch that the Rabbi Melech HaMashiach himself published years ago. So it's volume 8, Ches, and it started on page 3212, and we are currently on page 3218, which would be Aleph Taf Reish Tes Amud Beis. Otherwise, the top of the page has 3218 printed on top as the page number. In the right-hand column, at the second paragraph, the beginning of the new paragraph, which begins with a big word, Uma. This is our 10th class in this particular series in the S'dei Chemed. And we are now in the middle, we've been in the middle for the past number of classes, in the middle of the third topic, and that is the concept of Bitul Beroiv. Is there nullification in the majority if you're dealing with a quantity of food and it became mixed? Forbidden food got mixed into permitted food, and we cannot identify the forbidden food. We can't separate one from the other. So in Jewish law, for the Jew, it's very clear, very detailed, and at times somewhat complicated, but very clear. The Jewish Code of Law has an entire section dealing with it, and there's a lot of fine print, and this is one of the things that one needs to study in order to become an ordained rabbi. These are common questions that come up in your kosher kitchen, every Jewish home, and in large establishments, whether it's hotels, plants, bakeries, you name it. So the question is, do we apply any of these rules, and if so, which rules, to the B'nai Noach? So what we are in the middle of discussing, sort of, is one of the commentaries to the commentary of the Jewish Code of Law. And the particular commentary that we're talking about is the Pri Megadim. And he presents a doubt, a question, as to whether we apply the rule of Bitul, of nullifying, which means it's non-existent, by B'nai Noach. Does it apply or doesn't it apply? And we're going back and forth, whether we say that or not. So again, just to review a little bit, we've gone through a lot of details. In a kosher kitchen, for a moment, speaking strictly about the Jew, for the Jew. So what's prohibited for the Jew, which is not at all forbidden for the Ben Noach, is mixing meat and dairy. That's a big no-no for the Jew. Kosher meat and kosher dairy may not be cooked or eaten together. For the non-Jew, no problem. So, in a kosher kitchen, in a Jewish home, big pot, and you have to have separate dishes too. Separate dishes, completely. Big pot, a meat pot, cooking some stew, which has got a lot of meat in it, primarily meat. And it's cooking away on the fire. And somehow, a little bit of milk or cheese fell in. Accidents do happen, inevitably. So a little bit of milk falls in. Then they realize, oh my. So there's a whole slew of questions. Question number 1, what's the status of the food? Question number 2, what's the status of the pot? Question number 3, if there was a spoon or a ladle that was used to stir it or to take out some of the meat, what's the status of that? So you have a whole bunch of issues that you have to deal with. And the Jewish code of law is very clear and deals with all these things. So, without getting into all the details, basically, in this case, we say that if the ratio is 60 to 1, it's all good. I'm oversimplifying it, and that's just in general. But basically, if that little bit of milk is now dissolved, and it's not a piece of something that you could pull out, you look and it's gone. It's just, may see a little tinge of white in some area, but it's basically gone. So if you have at least 60 times of one so-called gender against the other, in this example, 60 times more meat, could be vice versa as well. It's all good. Never happened. There is no milk in that pot. Okay? Which doesn't mean that one would be permitted to do so in the first place. We're talking about after the fact. Now, let's bring it, practically speaking, to the Ben Noyach. Bnei Noyach cannot eat one type of food. And that, of course, as we've discussed many times, the 3 words in Hebrew, Eiver min hachai, which means a limb or any part of a living creature that was removed, detached from the creature that it came from before that particular creature was completely dead. Right? So a piece of meat that was removed from any animal, then the animal died, that piece is forever forbidden for human consumption for any human being on the face of the earth. I mean, short of a life and death situation. When I say every human being on the face of the earth, I mean normal, healthy people. Jew and non-Jew alike. Not allowed. Now, you have this non-Jew, a Ben Noyach, in his kitchen, and he's got big pot of meat that he's permitted to eat. So I could use the word kosher, but that would be too confusing because that sounds like it's permissible for the Jew to eat. So Ben Noyach kosher meat that's cooking away. Doesn't matter. It could be from sheep, from a goat, from an ox, from a horse, from a camel, from a pig, from a swine. Doesn't matter. As long as the animal was first killed. It's cooking away. And now, somehow, there was a piece of Eiver min hachai, a chunk of something, whatever it is, which came from an animal before the animal was dead. And it fell in. And it got mixed in. So how does that work? Do we need to have 60 times the amount? Do you need to have a majority? Or is it forever forbidden? Are we more strict? Are we more lenient? Like, how does it work? So basically what we're dealing with over here is we say, well, let's go back to the sources and let's see, how do we know the rules for the Jew? And then biblically speaking, can that apply to the Ben Noyach or not? So that's pretty much where we're at. And much of this has to do with a particular verse which says that you follow the majority. Or like they say in America, majority rules. So you follow the majority. Now, of course, at times it gets confusing because you don't know what the majority is, and every party claims that they're the majority. But under normal circumstances, if you have a group of people and you take a vote, well, you know that it's either a majority and a minority, or it's a tie. I mean, what are the options? But, okay. So let us proceed inside. Now, we're actually really in the middle of a discussion, but it's a new paragraph at least, and this is where we had to leave off last class. So there is a difference between dry goods mixing together, even if it's through cooking, but they're dry, one piece and another piece. I mean, when I say cooking, the definition of cooking is with water or with liquid. So, but still, when I say dry goods, I mean as opposed to liquid, as opposed to two liquids. So, page 3218, second paragraph, right-hand column. Umasha kosav, and that which he wrote, shim nisarev belach, that if it got mixed into something moist, meaning a liquid, v'ika shishim, and there at least 60 times against the non-good stuff that fell in, the hevikiman delesa, that then it is considered as if it's not there, it's non-existent. V'gam levenoyach mehani habitul, and for a non-Jew, for a ben noyach, it also works. It's also bitul. So, practically speaking, Jews, as a rule, with some exception, which I don't want to get into right now, are big time forbidden to eat, to drink, to consume blood. Okay? Let's not get into the exceptions. That's the general rule. No, as a rule, blood of an animal is forbidden. That's why part of the process of koshering meat is the salting. That's the only reason we salt it. It's not to commemorate or symbolic. It's a very scientific process of extracting the blood from the meat. That's why we salt it. And there's a particular way to do it because you want the salt to come out and not to go back in. So it's all a matter of time and how you have to wash it and so on. Okay. A non-Jew is forbidden to eat or drink, consume blood that came out of the animal before the animal was dead. That's the same general prohibition of Aver min hachai. It would be dam min hachai, blood from the living. However, major difference between the Jew and the non-Jew, the blood that was in the animal and that only was separated from the animal after the death of the animal, the Jew still can't have. The ben noyach may eat that, may drink it, no problem. Absolutely kosher for a ben noach. In other words, the ben noach does not have to kosher his meat. Not necessary to salt it. As long as the blood is blood which came out or was in the meat, and now through the cooking process, it's coming out because it was never koshered with salt. So when you cook it, that itself will bring out the blood. No problem. For the ben noach, blood is fine, as long as it came out after the death of the animal. Now here's the story. A ben noach has got a pot of blood cooking. That's what he's going to do. He's going to eat it. Liver is full of blood. So he is cooking liver and it's brewing in its own blood. And then somehow a little bit of blood that came from a living creature that was extracted before the animal died, whether it's the same animal or a different animal, irrelevant, fell into that mixture. Just like I mentioned before, a drop of milk fell into a drop of meat. Well, here it's blood and blood, so you really can't tell the difference, can't taste the difference, can't see the difference, and it fell in. So, he says that for the Ben Noach, the same rule of Bitul applies as it does for the Jew. Meaning, if you know that the ratio is at least 60 times more of the good blood, of the permissible blood, versus the forbidden blood, it's all good. The forbidden blood is not there, it doesn't exist. That's what he says. And then he says, K'moishe kosav Maran hachasam sofer. As our teacher, the Chasam Sofer, wrote. V'lo tzien mokim divrei kotshoy be'eze chelek u'be'eze simon. But he did not give us a reference to where the Chasam Sofer wrote it, which volume, which chapter. The Chasam Sofer is a responsa. It's many questions with answers, most of the time lengthy answers, where he explains his position. He was a great rabbi. Different questions from all facets of Jewish law were presented to him, and he gave his ruling and his decision as to whether it's permissible, whether it's forbidden, etc., etc., etc. Well, where does the Chasam Sofer say this? That for a Ben Noach, Bitul does work. Now, apparently, Mimasha Kosav Chasam Sofer, Yoyer Deira Soif Simon Yutes, B'dibra Matzlo Vadayin Ani, as a matter of fact, from what the Chasam Sofer does write in one place. Now again, it's possible that the Chasam Sofer writes differently in two different responses. And it's possible that he contradicts himself, and then that's a separate issue. We have to deal with that and decide how can he contradict himself? Did he change his mind? Did we misunderstand one of the two? That's what we always deal with when we have in Torah study an apparent contradiction within the same individual. But the S'dei Chemed is saying, I don't know where this Chasam Sofer is that says that Bitul does work by the non-Jew. All right? We're talking about the Maharamshik, which makes this statement about the Chasam Sofer. But what I do know, says the S'dei Chemed, and I'm going to quote, so to say, chapter and verse, meaning volume and chapter, I will quote for you where muchach be'epech, where it's clear that it's the opposite. That the Chasam Sofer says the opposite of what is claimed that the Chasam Sofer says without telling us where he says it. V'zel shoynoi. And we quote, this is the exact words of the Chasam Sofer, and he tells us exactly where it is in his section on Yeridea in chapter or responsa 19, and he tells you exactly which section, which paragraph there. And we quote, V'ein loymar, and one cannot say, T'tam ki'ikar loy nesar el Yisrael, v'loy lebnei Noach, that the concept of a taste of something being equivalent to the actual item, to the actual piece itself, is only forbidden for the Jew, but not for Bnei Noach. See, in Jewish law of kosher, so we have a concept. It's called tam ki'ikar. And it's not only that a piece of non-kosher meat is forbidden because it's non-kosher, for whatever reason, but the taste is also forbidden. Even though you don't have any of the actual substance, any of the meat there, but because you have the taste of that meat extracted from it, it's forbidden. So then the Chasam Sofer says, don't say that that's only forbidden for Jews and not for Bnei Noach. This is not so. Adarabba, to the contrary, Mivur b'loshen Rashi b'chulin, b'sugya d'zreya b'sheila, it is explained It comes out clear from the words, from the language of Rashi, which is the primary commentary on the written law as well as the oral law in Tanakh and in the entire Talmud. So Rashi, in the tractate which deals with laws of kosher, for this very reason, says Rashi, we need a verse. We need words in the written law to be able to deduce from it this concept of tam ki'ikar, that the taste is like the actual substance itself. Why? Why do I need a verse? Why isn't that just simply logical? Because logically, if you go with the regular, so to say, verse that he's about to quote, that we're dealing with all the time, so then, biblically, 1 against 2 should become nullified. There's a majority of 2 against 1, so the 1 doesn't exist. Dichsiv, because the verse says, Achrei Rabim lahatois. Go, follow, lean according to the majority. 2 against 1, win. V'im kain, and if so, b'ben noyach de'lo iksiv achrei rabim. So with regards to the ben noyach, we don't find such a verse. This verse of achrei rabim lahatois is in Jewish law. It's not talking about Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noyach. It's not talking about the non-Jew. Therefore, afilu be'elef lo batil. Even in 1,000, it will not be nullified. Adkan l'shoinoi. End of quote. So according to that Chasam Sofer, now he's going to spell it out in the next 2 lines, if you didn't get it. So says the S'dei Chemed, Harei, behold, shekosav, that he wrote, the Chasam Sofer wrote, de beben noyach lo iksiv achrei rabim, that with regards to the ben noyach, it does not state follow the majority. Ella, the only thing is, shebesoif siman ayin, that in a different chapter, fast forward in the Chasam Sofer, at the end of chapter 70, this was 19, at the end of 70, Fevesi divrei kotshay lekamon sif katan chaf, and I quote his words later on over here, much later. Nire, it appears from that later responsa, that it seems that the Chasam Sofer does hold that following the majority does apply to the ben noyach. Ayin sham, take a look there. So, comes out like this. According to this particular response of the Chasam Sofer, he says very clearly that the concept of achrei rabim lahatois, follow the majority, does not apply to non-Jews. And therefore, according to that, you have 1 piece of Eiver min achai, forbidden meat, and you have 1,000 absolutely perfectly permissible pieces of meat, and the 1 piece falls in and gets mixed in with the rest. They're all forbidden for the non-Jew, because can't go by the majority, and each piece might be the one that is forbidden. That's what it seems from this responsa. Problem is, in Siman Ayin, in 70, it seems quite clear that he says you do go by the majority. Okay? So we'll have to deal with that. If, in fact, it is a contradiction within the Chasam Sofer himself. But there clearly, so far, is at least a certain source to be able to say that for Bnei Noyach, we don't follow the majority, and therefore, there is, the subject that we're talking about over here, there is no bitul, no such thing as something forbidden becoming nullified in the greater and non-existent. No such thing. Next paragraph. V'roisi lagoin shoylu meishiv b'tinyona simen samach zayin b'dibra maschil v'hinei shalani harabani Rabbi Yosef Shurstein. So now he's quoting another one of the great rabbis of his day in his responsa, and he tells us exactly which section it is over there. It's Shoyelu Meishiv, chapter 67, and he tells us exactly which section there. B'mashakasav Pri Megadim, and again he quotes the Pri Megadim, which is the commentary on the code of law that we're dealing with, the one who actually clearly addresses, and he says there is a doubt as to whether there is the concept of Bitul for Bnei Noach or not. So the Pri Megadim, B'simen Samach Beis, on the Code of Jewish Law, chapter 62, the Ben Noach lo shayach be bitul beroiv, that for the Ben Noach there is no such thing as becoming nullified, as having the concept of something being nullified to the majority. V'af binis arev eiver min achai beroiv ksheiros, and even in a case when eiver min achai, that type of forbidden food, got mixed into a majority of kosher asur, it is still all forbidden. The lididei, because for them, for the non-Jews, for the Bnei Noach, loy nafik roiv, you don't go by the majority. The achrei rabim bi Yisrael hu diksiv, because this verse of achrei rabim is written with regards to Jews. Dim kein, for if so, my parich me'ever min achai. So why is he asking? What's the question from Eivir min achai? Dilma mayri dinis batel beroiv. Maybe it's talking about that it became nullified in the majority. Ul Yisrael shari v'lanochri asur, which would mean an interesting situation. For the Jew it would be permissible, and for the non-Jew it would be forbidden. V'heishiv, and he responds, Kol shenis batel beroiv, anything which became nullified in the majority, v'shari li Yisrael, and is permissible for the Jew, shuv le shayach lifnei iver, then no longer can you say that it's lifnei iver. To remind you, that's the verse that we learn out, that one can't cause someone else to stumble, to sin. You know, lifnei iver, in front of a blind man, don't put a stumbling block. So, as we discussed several times, it's insufficient for me to guard myself and to behave and not to transgress any prohibition. I'm not permitted to be the cause of someone else transgressing. I don't want to go into a whole different topic. And I want to give a practical example, but I don't want to get sidetracked. And open up any cans. Okay, so let me put it this way. Just for argument's sake, I'm not taking a position, and I'm not stating right or wrong. But for argument's sake, let's say that it is illegal and a bad habit to take drugs for recreational purposes. Not talking about prescribed medicine. And again, I'm not saying that that's true. These things are changing, especially in modern times. But for argument's sake, let's be old school. Let's go back a few decades and let's pretend like there is this thing that they started promoting, say no to drugs. All right? Most of you probably remember that. Today, it's probably not the case. But let's say that that's how we educate little children, and from a very young age, say no to drugs. Just for argument's sake. I don't mean to offend anybody, and if you're taking drugs and that's the thing to do nowadays, I'm not saying one way or the other. But for argument's sake, for my point, let's assume that it's not good. Or let's talk about cigarette smoking. Let's say that smoking cigarettes is unhealthy. And let's say that as a matter of fact, again, this is a whole different, interesting, controversial discussion. By Jewish law, for Jews, is it permissible to smoke cigarettes? Some say yes, some say no, and then somewhere in between. So, just for argument's sake, let's say that it's forbidden, which I'm not saying. So let's say it's forbidden to smoke. Now, if I have a pack of cigarettes, I won't smoke it. Can I give it to a smoker? Can I give it to a smoker? Can I be a drug dealer, but I don't take drugs? I just make money off of it. I sell it. Can I do that? And the answer is, if drugs are bad, if drugs are forbidden, if cigarettes are forbidden, then no, I can't supply it to anyone else. I can't assist in them getting it. If I have a grocery store and I sell non-kosher food to non-Jews, that's fine. If a Jew comes in, I'm not allowed to sell it to him. Unless the person is known to be observant and I can trust that he's not buying it for his own consumption, he's buying it for a non-Jew, his neighbor, his friend, whatever, an employer, an employee, whatever the case is. I cannot supply him with something that's forbidden. I can't say, I'm minding my own business. My business is, one of the commandments is not to cause other people to sin. All right? Which means that I cannot give Aver Minachai to a non-Jew. Aver Minachai, forbidden food for a non-Jew to eat, I cannot give to a non-Jew. I can't sell it to him, I can't give it to him. So now, very interesting scenario. You have, let's assume, like we're assuming at the moment, that the whole concept of Bitul does not apply to the non-Jew. There's no such thing as nullification. That verse is strictly talking for the Jew. So now, if I have this pot of kosher food, cooking, and a very small amount falls in an amount of forbidden food. For the Jew, it's kosher. For the non-Jew, it's still not kosher. I can eat it. Can I now feed it to the Ben Noach, to the non-Jew? So he says like this. Once it's got mixed together, and therefore it's permitted for the Jew, then you can't say that there is any prohibition of lifnei iver. The davka im noisin the fun of isur levad hu de asur. Halakan shnoisin the fun of davar shneisariv beroiv vein noisin no isur levad im kein legabe di day talinan bechol echad shu meharoiv ksheirois. Im kein gam kshnoisin lifnei akum ein machshiloi beisur deloi mi boy. Oh, answer like this. This is very interesting. Follow the logic. For the Jew, it's all good. It's all kosher. It's after the fact. The forbidden thing fell in, but there was much more of the permitted stuff, so the Jew can eat it. Now, the non-Jew can't. The non-Jew can't eat what? Can't eat any of it. Why not? Because we don't know, and therefore we don't say that it's nullified. However, he says that the Jew is allowed to give it, though, to the non-Jew. Because what can the Jew not give the non-Jew? Only something which is definitely not allowed for him. But just because it might not be allowed. So the non-Jew, if that happened to him, so he's got a problem, and it's all not permitted for him to eat. But as far as the Jew giving it to him, because it's only a doubt, and I'm the Jew, so it no longer falls into the category of don't put a stumbling block in front of someone else. Just got to follow the logic, because you can see it the other way. Say, wait a second, just because for you it's permitted, you got to view it for him. Right? Like if there's some food which I can eat and is healthy for me, but for someone else, for my fellow human being, who's got a terrible allergic reaction, it could kill him. So, what do you mean? If I can eat it, therefore I can give it to him? No, it's bad for him. But here we're saying, no, we're not. You can't give him what's forbidden for him. But since it's a mixture, and since for the Jew it doesn't exist as a prohibition, because there's this concept of bitul, of becoming nullified, therefore the Jew is allowed to give it to the non-Jew, and he goes on to explain. It goes without saying, l'shitas HaRambam, according to the opinion of Maimonides, that the whole concept of being strict when you have a doubt. All right? Whenever there's a doubt, so the general rule is got to be strict. Maimonides holds that is rabbinic. Biblically speaking, as long as you don't know for sure that something is forbidden, it's permitted. Rabbinically speaking, as long as you don't know for sure that it's permitted, it's forbidden. Imkain, if so, according to that, pshita de mutar. Of course, it's obvious that the Jew is allowed to give it to the non-Jew. The majority of this mixture, again, not that we're saying that the rest of it is nullified, but the majority is permissible. So whatever I'm giving him is at worst a doubt as to whether it's forbidden. Okay, a doubt is not biblically forbidden. And therefore, when the rabbinic law says that we have to be strict and whenever you have a doubt, so you have to assume that it's no good, they made that rule. Who says they made the rule for the Bnei Noach? That's a rule they made for Jews. That even though biblically speaking, if you're not sure, you don't have to refrain. They said, no, the other way around, that's for the Jew. But I'm saying not only according to that opinion is the Jew allowed to feed it to the non-Jew, and we're not worried that he's actually giving him a prohibited thing, but even according to a different opinion that argues with Maimonides, the Rashba. The Rashba holds that being strict when you have a doubt is a biblical requirement, not rabbinic. But in such a case, but for the Jew it's a doubt. Okay, this mixture that there might be some Eiver Minachai, there is some Eiver Minachai there, that's a doubt for the Jew. Still, there is no prohibition for the Jew of putting a stumbling block. Why? The forbidden food for the Jew became totally permitted because there was the proper bitul. All right? So it's no longer existent. After the fact, the Jew is allowed to eat this entire pot of food. Shouldn't he just leave over a little bit? No! We don't know which part is good, which part is not good. And since the ratio was good enough, therefore the law is it got mixed in. So for the Jew, it's all kosher. So if for the Jew it's all good, if so, so what he's giving the non-Jew is something which is permissible. At the very least, he's not handing him something which is clearly forbidden. Shuv, Raisi b'Prima Gadim b'Siman Samach Beis Sham. Furthermore, I saw in that same Prima Gadim over there, he says, Shehiksha hu ba'atzmai mishas hanal ayin sham, that he himself asked from the Talmud, Mashakasa bazeh, about what. Take a look over there what he wrote about it. Ad kan l'shoinoi. Okay, till here is the quote from this Shoyal Umeshiv. Now, says the S'dei Chemed here, V'chidush zeh, and this novelty, Sheloi hizkir divrei Pri Megadim shebapsicha hanal, that again, he didn't mention the words of the Pri Megadim in his introduction. The Pri Megadim keeps, the S'dei Chemed keeps on referring back to that. Everybody is dealing with the Pri Megadim in chapter 62. But what about the words of the Pri Megadim in his introduction? Vani navoich, and I am perplexed. B'divrei kodshoy halolu, in these holy words of his. Im havin b'kavanas ha Pri Megadim k'mesh kosafti hani hadal. Did he understand the Pri Megadim the same way that I, the very, he's using a very humble expression. I, the very lowly, poor-minded individual, understood? Or did he understand like the Maram Shik, which is different than the S'dei Chemed? How did the Shoyal Umeshiv understand it? And so therefore the discussion here is, does becoming nullified in a majority, does that apply, does that work for Bnei Noach? Besides the fact that it's not simple to say that it doesn't work. Furthermore, benitpas shagoyin mislonim b'shalas v'tshuvas eidus b'yosef siman vav here b'lav yirayos demahani ayin sham. Now he's quoting another place from another book called the Eidus b'Yosef, chapter 6, where he brought many proofs that it does work, that it does apply. And then he says, take a look in that sefer. So the discussion basically continues. Bottom of the right-hand column, last paragraph. Shuv. Shuv acharat pasa. Now again, after it was printed, he sakti shas shuvas bris yankiv lagoin marar baruch mordechai lifshitz v'reisi b'cheluk Chaim simin chafalov taf lamed gimel amud dalud v'dibramaskel reisi b'pir megadim. So says the S'dei Chemed, I found in another book called the Bris Yaakov. He tells us the name of the author and which volume it is. It's in the section on the Code of Law of Chaim, chapter 21. It tells us the exact page where it is over there. Shehevi, he too brings down this question, this doubt of the Pri Megadim in the Code of Law, chapter 62, as to whether there is or isn't the concept of Bitul when it comes to non-Jews. Bitul isur b'bnei Noach, whether there is the concept of a prohibition becoming nullified for the Bnei Noach. V'hevin b'daitoi, and he, this Bris Yaakov, understood in his mind the yoser pshita lei, that it is more obvious to the Pri Megadim that by Bnei Noach lo yazinu basaruba, that by Bnei Noach we do not follow the majority. And that this is the way it is written also in another one of the very, very great rabbis known as the Noida B'Yehuda, in his responsa in chapter 42, that he too seems to say that there is no concept of Bitul for the non-Jews. V'tama aleihem, and this Bris Yaakov is questioning. He's bewildered by their opinions. What's the problem? Dim Kain, because if you're gonna say that there is no concept of Bitul, Beroiv, of becoming nullified in the majority for the non-Jews, if so, Eich Chayav ben Noach al Eishes Aviv le Rabbi Akiva ulu Rabbi Eliezer al Achois Aviv. Now, then how can a ben Noach be liable for committing adultery with his father's wife, according to Rabbi Akiva, or with his father's sister, according to Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, it's not his mother. It's his father's wife. A ben noyach, according to some opinions, whether it's his father's wife or his father's sister, depending on these two Tanoic opinions, is committing adultery if he has relations with her. So wait a second. His father, you never know with certainty beyond a doubt who your father is. It's all based on probability. We only know which womb you came out of. We know who carried this baby 9 months of pregnancy, and then there's witnesses that this infant emerged out of this woman. But who the father is? It's an assumption. It's probability. So the Ben Noach should never be put to death for having any forbidden relations of any of his father's relatives, because who says this man is really his father? And Maimonides, in the 9th chapter of Kings, which is where he deals with the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, chapters 9 and 10 over there. In the 9th chapter, law number 5, Kosav, the Rambam Maimonides writes as follows: Dechayav al mefutas aviv. That a ben Noach is liable for having relations with his father's seducee, meaning a woman that his father convinced to have relations with him. In other words, even if they're not legally married, but if they are living together as husband and wife, that's enough for the son of the father to be liable for living with his father's woman, as if it was his father's wife. So now we're asking, wait a second, Vamai, why in the world would he be liable for that? Maybe it's not his father. So we do go by probability. So it's not always absolute. That's the question. How can you say that for a non-Jew, it's always got to be absolute? No, it's only kosher if it's all kosher. What do you mean? Here, in this different case, we do find that we follow probability. And that which it says in the Noida B'Yehuda, that we're being strict when it comes to them, to be strict with the Ben Noach. He's no better than the Jew who is put to death based on probability, based on a majority. In other words, if let's say a Jew were to commit such a forbidden crime, a forbidden act, with his father's relative, or for that matter, what happens if a Jew was to strike his father? He hit his father and caused him a wound to bleed. That's a capital offense. That son would be put to death if all the criteria was met. So wait a second. We don't know for sure that that's really his father. That's just an assumption of probability. And yet, for the Jew, that is enough to be put to death for that. So why should we be any more lenient with a non-Jew? Yeah, we follow probability. Rak t'chayshinim ben noyach kam l'miyut. L'isur. The only thing is, by the ben noyach, we also work it the other way. We're concerned with the minority as well. But it's not that it's got to be an absolute. On the contrary, by the Jew, there's the concept of the minority considered that it's not there. But by the Ben Noyach, we are also concerned with the minority to be strict, not to be lenient with him. So therefore, if this is his father, we assume that it is his father. But if something gets mixed into something else, something forbidden gets mixed into something else, and it's the minority, we still are strict with him. So we go both ways, unlike the Jew. So, Dvar of Temuim, says the S'dei Chemed, this explanation is very bewildering. Why? If you're not going by the majority, so what's going on over here? Im kein hevik is suffix, so it's like a doubt. Why is a ben noyach put to death if it's a doubt? At the end of the day, if you don't go by the majority, in other words, why is this guy his father? Well, because the majority of cases is that children of a married couple, in most cases, are that man's children. So therefore, it's only based on statistics, on majority, on probability. But by Ben Noyach, we don't go by that. So that means that there is no, technically speaking, there is no absolute basis to say who the father is. So the Ben Noyach should never be put to death for any transgression against father, whether it's his father's sister, whether it's his father's wife, which is not his mother, whatever. The pshita, for it is simple, that if Eiver Minachai got mixed into a majority of kosher, proper, slaughtered meat, even though by the Ben Noyach we do not go by the majority to permit the whole mixture, or if there's a mixture of one against one, one kosher, one non-kosher, then of course you don't say it's good, because there's no majority. What happens if the Ben Noyach ate one of them? There was one kosher, one non-kosher, 2 pieces of meat. He ate one. He didn't eat the other. We don't know which one he ate. They got mixed up. We don't know which is the kosher meat and which is the Eiver Minachai, and he ate one. Would we put him to death? No. Tavi Safik, because it's a doubt. He may not have eaten the forbidden piece. And again, loy mi boy la Rambam. And it goes without saying, according to Maimonides, that being strict when you have a doubt is rabbinic. If so, it's permissible for a ben noyach to eat something which is a doubt. As long as you don't know for sure that it is Eiver Minachai, he should be allowed to eat it. Because the whole concept of being strict when you have a doubt is rabbinic, and that doesn't apply to the Bnei Noach. So now we've taken it so far at this point, you don't even need a majority. All you need is 50-50. You just need a reasonable doubt. Not 2 against 1. 1 against 1. It's a 50-50 chance. It's a doubt. That is literally a doubt. If it would be 51-49 in either direction, you can argue and say, well, it's not such a doubt. Of course it's a doubt. Even 99 versus 1 is a doubt. But as long as it's not 50-50, you can say it's more probable one way or the other. 50-50, that's really the doubt. There is no probability. And since the concept of being strict when you have a doubt, according to the Rambam, is a rabbinic institution, edict, only applies to the Jew. Which means that any time you don't know for sure that it's Eiver Minachai, it should be permissible for the Ben Noach to eat it in the first place. Not just that if he ate it, he doesn't get put to death. He can eat it if it's 50-50 chance. And even according to the Rashba, that being strict when you have a doubt, is biblical, or we could say where the prohibition became established, where it's for sure something there. It's not that we don't know. We have two pieces, and we do know. We just don't know which is which. So in that case, even according to the Rambam, it would be a biblical obligation to be strict. Nonetheless, together suffix heavy, but it's still a doubt. So yes, you have to be strict and refrain from it, but it's still a doubt. You don't know for sure that he transgressed. And everybody agrees that you don't give the 39 lashes, you don't put someone to death if it is a doubt. If a Jew may have committed a sin, that the penalty is such and such, the punishment is this and this, unless we know for sure that he actually committed the sin, we don't give him the punishment. And furthermore, we've established in the Code of Jewish Law, in chapter 109, the Isur Batul Beroiv Yalfin Mirabim Lahatois, that the concept that a forbidden thing becomes nullified in the majority, we learn it out from this verse that says, follow the majority. If so, says, why you, unlike all the others that we said that this verse is a verse speaking to the Jew, he says, wait a second, not at all. What is one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach? What is one of those 7? What's number 7? Dinim. Well, I'm sorry, when I say number 7, dinim means to set up a court system. To set up a system that will judge and make sure that people don't transgress. Dinim. Well, guess what? That verse that we keep on throwing around over here of Achrei, Rabim, Lahatois, follow the majority, that verse is written with regards to a court where there's a number of judges, sort of concept of a jury, there's a number of judges, you follow the majority vote of the 23 or the 71 or whatever they are, or the 3. So that is a verse which is speaking about law of judgment, of ruling in a court. Of course that's relevant to the Ben Noach. The non-Jews are obligated, because of this one of the 7 Noachite commandments, they are obligated to establish judges in every district and to do what? To judge them if they're keeping the Sheva Mitzvahs. And if someone is transgressing, put him to death. As Maimonides writes in chapter 9 of the Laws of Kings, Law 14. And according to Nachmanides, the Parshas Vayishlach, in his commentary to the Bible, to the Chumash, in Genesis, in the Torah section of Vayishlach, B'nei Noach mechuyavin b'chol dinei mominis, k'mo Yisrael. Ramban, Nachmanides says that the B'nei Noach are obligated to keep all of the financial, all of the laws pertaining to property and finances, money, just like the Jews are. In other words, you can learn that Torah portion of Mishpatim in Exodus, and with all of the oral law, the Talmud's explanations, and that all applies in the same way to the non-Jews. That's what the Ramban says. Umichlal ha-mitzvah lo yishiv dayonim. And amongst this mitzvah of the laws is to appoint and to place judges. Ladun oisoi, to judge him. Im kein, if so, after ben Noach nerag b'dayan echad, even though, yes, there are some differences. For example, a ben Noach is put to death based on one judge. In Jewish law, no such thing. You can't have less than a 23 judge court for a capital offense. Ben Noach, you can have one single judge. Mikol Makom, nonetheless, Ika Toive Dayanim, but if you have more judges, V'nechlaku Dayanim, and now they're differentiating, there's a dispute within the judges as to whether this person is liable or not in a particular case. Im lischus im l'choiva, there's a split whether he's innocent or guilty. Im kein, if so, eich yadunu. So how in the world are they supposed to judge the case? My chazis, what did you see? Did tzayis lahani, tzayis lahani. Why are you going to listen to these? Listen to those. Why are you listening to the judges that say he's innocent? Listen to the ones who say guilty. Why are you listening to the judges that say he's guilty? Listen to the ones who say he's innocent. Like, how in the world are you supposed to judge the case? In either direction. Is if you have more than one judge and they don't all agree. Al karchin, therefore we must say, the only logical way is that they also have this rule of achrei rabim lahatis, go by the majority. So if they have a court which has, let's say, 12 judges, go by the majority. 5 say one way, and all the rest say the other way. They all voted, go the majority, whether it's for innocence or for guilt. Like, what else are you supposed to do? She says, of course, by Bnei Noach, this verse applies. V'chevan das linim bedidhu basa ruba badayonim k'moi b'Yisrael. And since, logically, it has to be that by the non-Jews, we also follow the majority of judges, just like by the Jews. And this is based on the verse that says follow majority. Once we've applied this verse for judges, the same thing applies in every case. That verse is the basis of the concept in Jewish law of following the majority. Azlina basaruba, go by the majority for everything. Just like for us, for the Jews. We learn out the concept of something forbidden becoming nullified in a greater number, in a majority of something permitted from this verse. Now the verse is speaking only about judges. How in the world do we determine pieces of meat or eggs based on a verse which is speaking about following the majority of judges? But there you have it. We do. So if we do, why are Bnei Noach any different? Bnei Noach have to have judges. That verse is a biblical verse which applies to Bnei Noach. And if it applies to Bnei Noach as judges, so just like from that verse, we can determine mixtures of food, not just of people's opinions. Same thing for Bnei Noach. The kolshkin ruba deika kamon, and especially if it's the majority which is in front of us. So therefore, obviously and simple and definitely, if you have in front of us a mixture of Eiver min Achai, forbidden meat, that got mixed into properly slaughtered kosher meat, and it's all in front of us, it is permissible for the non-Jew, just as it's permissible for the Jew. V'chein muchach b'Yerushalmi, the Sanhedrin, Perek Daled, Din Zayin, and the same thing is understood from the Talmud Yerushalmi, Dine Nefashis Maschilim Min Atzad, that when it comes to the judges giving their opinion on a capital offense, so you start from the side, meaning you don't, in that case, you don't give so-called respect to the elder or to the wisest of this, of the residing court. And we were afraid that because if you first honor the wisest to state his opinion, that will influence or somehow taint the opinion of the others, and they won't be able to say their true opinion, and therefore we always start from the side, not from the wisest, and let him state his opinion first. So there is a dispute in the Talmud between these two great rabbis, Talmudic rabbis, Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish. Chadam, or one of them says, Dinenu ki dinehen, that our laws are like their laws. And one says, no, our laws are not like their laws. So according to the one that says that our laws are like their laws, that means that they too, the non-Jews, also when it comes to judging, they start from the side instead of from the head. After time of the Bistro Masklim in Atzad, Mishum Loisan al Riv, Rav Ksiv. So wait a second. Why do we start from the side when it comes to a Jewish court? It's clearly based on a verse that's right there where it says, Achri Rabbi Mahatois. The verse states that do not go by, and then it says Riv, which means dispute, but it's spelled in the Torah with a missing letter so that it can be read in order to teach us this with the oral tradition, Rav, which means the greatest of the court. In other words, so that no one should argue with the head of the court, we specifically don't have him state his opinion until all the rest do. If so, lo yachloiku olav. So they're not going to argue with him if he states his opinion, and we're never going to get to the proper majority vote if everyone just has to follow what the head says, and the head goes first. So that's not much of a vote. And then we're not going to be able to fulfill what the verse says, to go by the majority. Okay. But when it comes to Ben Noyach, he is put to death based on the judgment of one single judge. Bnei Noach, as we said, can have one judge, and he's the one who decides. He's the only one who votes. So if he says guilty, that's it. They put him to death. So this reason doesn't apply. So then why do they start, if they have a court of many people, why do they start from the side, according to the opinion that says that we are like the non-Jews in this regard, and they also start from the side? Why do they start from the side? Therefore we have to say, with regards to them as well, that if there are many judges, they don't need more than one judge, but in a case when they do have many judges, you do go by the majority. End of quote. In other words, what he's saying is, this verse does apply to non-Jews. So it comes out that his opinion of the Bris Yaakov agrees with what we've brought down before, that by non-Jews you do go by the majority. In everything. Just like by Jews. Because that verse is talking about a case of judgment. And from that, we derive it and we apply it to everything, including pieces of meat. And since non-Jews do have judgment, that is part of the 7 Noachide commandments, and we even apply the idea of starting from the side, even though it doesn't have to even be applicable, because if you have one judge, it's good enough. Yet, in a case where they have many judges, it still applies. So we see that we are applying these rules very much to the non-Jewish court system. Therefore, you apply it all the way, and there is the concept of Bitul Beroiv, and according to him, as well, for Bnei Noach, if you have one piece of non-kosher, Eiver Min HaChai, that fell in and got mixed in with other stuff, it is Bitul, and it is all permitted for the Ben Noach to eat, just as for the Jew. Till next time, wishing everyone the greatest success in studying, in promoting, in observing the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, and making this somewhat, seemingly at times, crazy world, not a world of chaos, not a world which is not a jungle, but created for the purpose of revealing God for all of creation, and that He and only He will reign forever through the coming and the total revelation of our righteous Mashiach. May it happen immediately now. Thank you.